don't forget your luncheon engagement with Mr. Rolstead, Nancy Drew reminded her father at the breakfast table. I'll telephone him the first thing after I reach my office, Carson Drew promised. But again, I warn you not to anticipate startling news. I won't, Father, Nancy laughed. But if I should happen to learn something which has a bearing on the missing will, I won't be exactly disappointed. What are your plans for the day, Nancy? Oh, nothing special. I thought I would do a little shopping this morning, and I'm invited to a party one of the girls is giving in the afternoon. Then you are too busy to take luncheon with me? Oh, Father, you know I've just been dying for an invitation, Nancy declared, her eyes dancing. I'm so anxious to learn something about that will. All right, if you have time, drop in at my office about 12:30. Mr. Rolstead may not accept my invitation, but if he does, we'll try to find out something about Josiah Crawley. Of course, I don't need to warn you not to appear too eager for information. I'll let you do all the talking. I'll just keep my ears open. I'll look for you at 12:30 then. Mr. Drew pushed back his chair and glanced at his watch. He must hurry, or I'll be late getting downtown. After her father had left, Nancy Drew finished her breakfast and then went to the kitchen to consult with Hannah, the maid, concerning the work of the day. Although only 16, Nancy was unusually capable, and under her skillful direction, everything ran smoothly in the Drew household. On the death of her mother 6 years before, she had taken over the entire management of the establishment. The Drews employed one servant, Hannah Gruen, an elderly maid of all work, who had been with them for many years. The responsibility of the household might have weighed heavily upon Nancy, but she was the type of girl who was capable of accomplishing a great many things in a comparatively short length of time. She enjoyed sports of all kinds, and she found time for clubs and parties. In school, Nancy was very popular, and she boasted many friends. People declared that she had a way of taking life very seriously without impressing one as being the least bit serious herself. While at school, Nancy had made one particular chum, Helen Corning, of whom we shall hear more later. She had also made 2 enemies, the Topham sisters. Once she had caught Ada in wrongdoing in class, and both sisters had placed the blame on Nancy. But Helen and 2 others had come to Nancy's rescue. Since that time, Ada and Isabel had been more hateful to Nancy than ever. I'll not be back for luncheon today, Nancy told Hannah as she prepared to leave the house. I have made out the dinner menu and ordered the groceries, so I guess you won't need me for a few hours. Leaving the house, she went to the garage where she kept her automobile. It was a shining new blue roadster, the birthday gift of her father. Quickly backing the automobile to the street, she set off for the shopping district. She drove swiftly down the boulevard and upon reaching the more congested streets, wormed her way skillfully through heavy traffic. Entering a department store, she made a number of small purchases on the main floor and then went directly to the wearing apparel section, as it was her intention to purchase a frock suitable for the afternoon party to which she had been invited. Usually, Nancy found the service excellent, but this morning was an especially busy one, and an extra rush of customers had temporarily overwhelmed the sales force. She did not mind waiting her turn, but quietly sat down in a convenient chair and glanced about with interest. After a time, her attention was attracted toward 2 girls who, like herself, were waiting for an available saleswoman, but less patiently. Instantly, Nancy recognized them as Ada and Isabel Topham. They were remonstrating with the floor manager, and their voices carried so far that she could not help hearing what they said. "We've been standing here nearly 10 minutes, Ada said petulantly. "Send a saleswoman to us immediately." I'm afraid I can't, the floor manager said regretfully. There are a number of others ahead of you. An extra rush of customers. Perhaps you don't know who we are, Ada interrupted rudely. Indeed, I do, the floor manager told her with a trace of weariness. I will have a saleswoman here in a few moments. If you will only wait. We're not accustomed to waiting, Isabel Topham told him icily. Such service, Ada chimed in. Do you realize that my father owns stock in this store? If we report your conduct to him, he could have you discharged. I'm sorry, the harassed floor manager apologized, but it is a rule of the store. You must await your turn. Ada tossed her head and her dark eyes flashed angrily. In spite of the expensive clothes she wore, she was anything but attractive, for she was tall and slender to the point of being termed skinny. Now that her face was distorted with anger, she was positively ugly. Isabel, who was the pride of the Topham family, was rather pretty in a vapid sort of way, but Nancy Drew thought that her face lacked character. She had acquired an artificial manner of speaking which was both irritating and amusing. It was her mother's ambition that someday she marry into a wealthy family, and every opportunity was given her for a brilliant match. The two sisters were older than Nancy, but had been in her class at school. She had found them stupid as well as arrogant. They had never been popular with their classmates and had boasted few friends. Now, as they turned from the floor manager and saw her for the first time, Nancy bowed. Isabel coldly returned the bow, but did not speak a word of greeting. Ada gave no indication that she had even noticed her. Snobs, Nancy told herself. The next time, I won't even bother to speak to them. At that moment, a saleswoman hurried toward the Topham girls, and at once they began to shower abuse upon her for her failure to wait upon them sooner. Nancy watched them curiously as they examined the gowns which the saleswoman brought out for their approval. Evidently, Isabel and Ada were in an unpleasant frame of mind, for they tossed aside beautiful creations of lace and chiffon with scarcely a second glance. They found fault with everything. A very chic gown, the saleswoman told them hopefully, as she displayed an attractive dress. It is a Paris model and arrived this morning. Ada picked it up, gave it one careless glance, and then tossed it into a chair. The gown slipped to the floor in a crumpled mass, and to the horror of the saleswoman, Ada stepped on it as she turned to examine another dress. In disgust, Nancy moved away and began to examine a rack of dresses in another part of the room. Presently, as she wandered back, she saw that Ada and Isabel were leaving without having made a purchase. As they swept past, Ada brushed against her. Instead of apologizing, she wheeled and surveyed Nancy coldly. "Do watch where you are going," she said tartly. Nancy stifled a sharp retort and made no reply. Not without amusement, she watched the Topham sisters as they flounced to the elevator. I don't wonder that people say such mean things about them, Nancy told herself. Her thoughts were cut short as a saleswoman offered her services. It was the same girl who had waited upon the Topham sisters. Nancy quickly selected a party frock of blue crepe, which matched her eyes, and went to the fitting room to try it on. "It's a real pleasure to serve you, Miss Drew," the saleswoman assured her when they were alone. "But how I dread to see the Topham sisters come into the store. They are so unreasonable." "Ada and Isabel aren't very popular," Nancy agreed. "They seem to think their word is law." The saleswoman sighed. "And I'm afraid it will be if they get all of Josiah Crowley's money." She lowered her voice. "The estate hasn't been settled, but they're counting on the fortune already. I heard Miss Ada say to her sister, "Oh, I guess we'll get all of old Crowley's fortune as soon as the lawyers stop squabbling." But it's my opinion the Toplums are mightily worried for fear somebody will show up with a later will, which may do them out of most of it. Nancy was far too wise to engage in gossip with the saleswoman, for she could not tell how far anything she might say would be carried. But she was interested in the information. The fact that the Tophams were worried indicated to her that they were of the opinion that Josiah Crowley had made a second will. Evidently, they were somewhat disturbed by the claims of the other relatives. Ordering the frock which she had purchased sent to her home, Nancy glanced at her watch and saw that it was after 12 o'clock. She had too realized it was later than she thought. "I must hurry or I'll be late in meeting Father," she thought, and left the store. She drove directly to her father's office and, although a few minutes ahead of the appointed time, found that he was ready to leave. "What luck, Father?" Nancy demanded eagerly when they were alone in the inner office. "Did Mr. Rolstead promise to take luncheon with you?" "Yes. We are to meet him at the Royal Hotel in 10 minutes. Do you still think I should quiz him about the Crowley will?" "Oh, I'm more than ever interested in the case, Father. I can't tell you why, but I just seem to know that Josiah Crowley made a second will." "Well, your intuitions are frequently correct, Nancy. So I'll do my best to find out what Mr. Rolstead knows about the case. However, I must warn you not to appear too eager for information, or he may suspect we have a dark motive behind the luncheon invitation." "I'll be careful," Nancy laughed. The Royal Hotel was located less than a block away, and Nancy and her father quickly walked the distance. As they entered the lobby, they found Mr. Rolstead there ahead of them. Carson Drew introduced his daughter, and the three made their way to the dining room where a table had been reserved. At first, the conversation centered about a variety of subjects. As the luncheon progressed, the two lawyers began to talk enthusiastically of their college days together and finally of their profession. Nancy began to fear that the subject of the Crowley estate never would be brought up. Then, over the coffee cups, Carson Drew skillfully swung the conversation into a new channel and began to discuss strange cases which had fallen into his hands. "By the way, I haven't heard the details of the Crowley case. How are the Tophams making out? I understand the relatives are trying to break the will." For a moment, Mr. Rolstead remained silent, and Nancy began to think that he did not intend to enter into a discussion of the case. "The case wasn't turned over to me, Carson," the lawyer said quietly, "but I confess I followed it rather closely because of a special interest I happen to have in Crowley. As the present will stands, I do not believe it can be broken." "Then the Tophams will get the entire estate," Mr. Drew commented. "Yes, unless another will is uncovered." "Another will?" Carson Drew inquired innocently. "Then you believe Crowley made a second one?" Mr. Rolstead hesitated as though uncertain whether or not he should divulge additional information, and then, with a quick glance about, lowered his voice. "Of course, I wouldn't want this to get out," he began doubtfully. "You may trust Nancy not to repeat," Mr. Drew observed, guessing what was in the lawyer's mind. "I found that out by experience," and Carson Drew smiled upon his daughter. "Then I will say this much. It would not surprise me if another will should come to light. The Tophams treated Crowley most unkindly after he had made his will in their favor.
About a year ago, Crowley came to my office and told me that he wanted to draw up a new will. He indicated that he intended to cut the Tophams off without a cent. He expressed a desire to write the will himself and asked me a number of questions. I told him exactly how to proceed. When he left my office, he promised that he would have me look over the document when he had drawn it up. "Then you actually saw the will?" Mr. Drew asked in surprise. "No, strange to say, Crowley never came back. I don't know whether he drew up the will or not."
And if he did, there would be an excellent chance that it would not be legal, I suppose. Yes, it's a real trick to draw up a will that cannot be broken, but Josiah Crowley was a very careful man. Still, if he left even a loophole, the Tophams would drag the matter into court. Yes, it is a foregone conclusion that the Tophams will keep the fortune, whether they have a right to it or not. They have the advantage of money, you know. I believe the other relatives have filed a claim, but they have no proof a second will exists, and without money they cannot hope to fight the Tophams. While her father and Mr. Rolsted discussed the case, Nancy Drew remained silent, but not a word of what was said escaped her. Although she gave no indication of her feelings, the information excited her. After a time, Mr. Drew paid the luncheon check, and the three arose and left the dining room. Mr. Rolsted took leave of them in the lobby. "Well, Nancy, did you find out what you wanted to know?" Carson Drew inquired after the lawyer had disappeared. "Oh, Father, it's just as I suspected. Mr. Crowley did make a second will." "You mustn't jump hastily at conclusions," Mr. Drew warned her. "It's possible that Crowley never drew up the will at all, or if he did, he may have destroyed it. That's possible, of course, but he had no love for the Tophams, and I have a feeling he hid the will someplace. Oh, if only I could find it." "It would be as easy as looking for a needle in a haystack," Mr. Drew replied. "If I were you, I would forget about the case, Nancy." "I can't forget about it until I've at least made an attempt to find out what became of that will," Nancy insisted stubbornly. "All right, dig into the mystery if you like, but I'm afraid you've set yourself an impossible task. I don't see how you hope to discover what became of the will when you haven't even a clue." "I'll find a way," Nancy laughed. "Give me time and I'll surprise you." But after she had said goodbye to her father and was slowly driving toward home, doubt assailed her. She knew that the odds were against her. Although she was determined to find out what had become of the Crowley will, she was at a loss to know how to begin. As her father had reminded her, she did not have a single clue. "Where there's a will, there's a way," she quoted whimsically. That old proverb is doubly true in the Crowley case. If there actually is a second will, I'm going to find it. And if I do, I hope it won't prove to be in the Tophams' favor.